Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. As I promised in my last video, I am sitting down today to share with you my experience going through the HSG procedure. I just want to give a little disclaimer here before I get into it that first of all, some of what I talk about might be a little TMI for some of you. So if that's the case, you'll just want to click out of this video and watch something else. And the other thing is that just keep in mind as I'm sharing this with you that this is my experience with the procedure. You may have already gone through an HSG and experienced something different, or you may be preparing to go into one and you might very well have a completely different experience during your procedure. So just keep that in mind as I'm sharing this with you. Okay, so first of all, if you have no idea what the HSG is, it stands for hysterosalpingogram. It's basically an x-ray of the pelvis, and they insert a catheter through the cervix and push dye through in order to see the inside of the uterus and hopefully the fallopian tubes. It basically just shows the doctor the shape of your uterus and if your fallopian tubes are blocked or not. So before the procedure, I was feeling pretty nervous. I had heard that for some people this procedure is pretty painful, and a lot of what I heard honestly were just really bad experiences. So I was nervous about that, but honestly I was more nervous about the results of the test, or just the anticipation waiting to find out the results. I did have my husband John drive me to and from the appointment. I just wasn't sure how I was going to react to everything, so I'm grateful that he was there just in case for some reason I was in too much pain to be able to drive. I did, about an hour before the procedure, I took 2 extra strength Tylenol. It was recommended to me that I take something. They had mentioned ibuprofen, but really they said ibuprofen, Tylenol, Advil, anything like that, just to help minimize some of the pain. So if you are preparing to go into an HSG procedure, that's something I would probably consider. Depending on your pain level, you may want to have already taken that before the procedure instead of waiting until after and realizing that you're in a lot of discomfort. It's better to just take it before, in my opinion. So I am being seen at a really big military hospital. My husband's in the military, so my reproductive endocrinologist is at this huge military hospital. So I didn't actually go to the fertility clinic to have this procedure done. I know some clinics do offer this in their offices, but since this was at a big medical center, they just sent me over to the radiology department there, and that's where I had the procedure done. Once it was time for my appointment, they called me back to an x-ray room. I guess that's what it's called, I'm not really sure, but they had me change into a hospital gown. From the waist down, I needed to have all of my clothes off because of the procedure and how they insert the dye and everything. So I changed into the hospital gown and waited for them to take me into the room. I was again starting to feel just like really nervous about everything, and I'm glad my husband was there to just help calm my nerves a little bit. And I know some places don't allow the spouses or anyone you're with to go back with you, but they were really kind and made an exception in our case. So I'm grateful that my husband was there. He was there with me the entire procedure, so it was just comforting to me to have him there, like knowing that he was just right there with me, and yeah, it was just comforting for me. Once I was all changed and they were ready for me, they took me into the x-ray room, and there was this really long x-ray table that I had to sit on, and they had some pillows and blankets there, and then they had like the huge movable x-ray machine kind of hanging over the table. So they told me not to lay down right away. They were gonna go over some things with me. So I sat on the table, and then there were 2 doctors there, as well as some medical students. So I had like an audience of, I think, including my husband, 6 or 7 people. There were a lot of people in the room, so that was a little intimidating, but that's another reason why I was grateful that my husband was there, because it just overall calmed me down significantly. So the 2 doctors came over to me and started explaining the procedure and how everything was going to go. And then I had to sign some consent forms. Basically, there's just like a really minimal risk of infection and a small risk of bleeding. So I just had to sign the consent forms explaining that, yes, I understand that there's a very small risk and all of that. Before they actually started the procedure, the doctors did ask if I had any questions, which I didn't have any questions. I went into the appointment fairly well educated just from the research I had done myself on what to expect. But I did let them know that I would really appreciate if they would just walk through everything as they are doing it. So I'm the kind of person who I'd rather know exactly what they're doing as it's happening. That way, in just my mind, since I can't really see everything that's going on, it was just helpful for me to have it all step by step explained as it was happening. So they were completely understanding, and they said, yes, if you want us to let you know what's going on as it's going on, we will definitely do that. So that's another tip for you, is to just advocate for yourself. If you don't want to know anything and you just want to sit there in silence, then let them know that. Or if you're like me and you want them to walk you through everything, definitely speak up and let them know that's what you prefer. And I am so grateful I did that, just because it was helpful for me to just be aware of everything as it was happening. Once they were ready, they had me lay down on the table, and it's similar to a pap smear in that you have to like scoot your butt down all the way to the edge of the table, and it was a little different. So like normally your knees are like kind of just like this, but they actually had me butterfly, like as if I'm sitting in a butterfly position, but laying down, if that makes sense. So I wasn't expecting that. I thought it was just going to be like a pap smear where your legs are in the stirrups and that whole thing, but it was not like that. Once I laid down and they were preparing to start the procedure, I don't know what it was. I think it was just laying down. I started just feeling like my heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Like my heart was racing and I was just feeling really nervous. And so I knew that the more nervous I was and the more tense I was, the more likely it would be painful. So I tried my best to calm myself down, and I did some yoga breathing. I like to practice yoga at home. So as they were about to start, I just let them know like, hey, I'm okay, but I'm taking some deep breaths in hopes that it will help relax me and calm my heart rate down, because I could just feel like my heart pumping out of my chest. As requested, they let me know, okay, we're gonna start the procedure now. They started by inserting the speculum, which a lot of the time, from what I've heard from people, that is the most uncomfortable part for them. And it was not comfortable, let me just say that. But it definitely, for me, was not the most painful part of the procedure. So they inserted the speculum so that they could open everything up and see the cervix. So once that was done, they cleaned around the cervix just to create, a sterile environment as they are preparing to insert the catheter. They inserted the catheter through the cervix and into the uterus. And the doctor did warn me that as soon as she started inserting the catheter, that I would probably start feeling really, as she described it, really bad period cramps. So I was kind of preparing to start feeling that pain, and instantly, as soon as she inserted the catheter through my cervix into the uterus, I felt an extremely intense cramp. For me, it was not like period cramps though. I usually have really bad cramping during my periods, and the pain I feel is typically all throughout my lower back, and the pain just radiates down my legs. And during this procedure, it was not like that at all. It was a very, very isolated pain, and I could tell it was coming from my uterus. It just felt like my uterus was contracting. And at first it kind of took my breath away because I was expecting to feel like pain in my back, but that's not what the case was. It was very much isolated to my uterus and pelvic area. They inserted the catheter, and then they let me know that they were beginning to push the contrast, or some people say contrast, some people say dye. They inserted the contrast, and I was still experiencing really intense cramping, but it wasn't that bad. I was able to just breathe through it, and I just kept breathing through it. It wasn't an unbearable pain, thankfully, and it wasn't nearly as bad as the period cramps I do experience on a monthly basis. So one of the things during the procedure was they had the screen flipped kind of towards me, so I was able to see everything that was happening, and I was grateful for that because I wasn't just sitting there like staring at the ceiling, not having any clue what was going on. So I watched that monitor pretty much the whole time, and I could see the dye going through, and they started taking images, and the images started popping up on the screen. So of course the first thing I saw was my uterus. From what I could tell, it was shaped normally, and then I started seeing the dye going through, I think it was my left fallopian tube, and I saw that it was like spilling out from the tube into the pelvis. But I noticed that on the right side nothing was happening. Like there was no tube, there was nothing happening on the right side. And so I was like, that's interesting. Initially, of course, my first thought was my right tube is blocked. Like that's it. Like that's what's been going on. That's why we haven't been able to get pregnant. Like that's the answer right there. But before they went any further, they had me turn onto my right hip. So I kind of had to like maneuver over onto my right side, which I was worried about because like the speculum's still in there, the catheter's in there. I was a little worried about moving and then kind of messing up something, but it went okay. I moved to my right side, and after a little while, it seemed like it was taking a long time, but eventually the contrast did go through my right fallopian tube, and they were able to see that it spilled out on the right side. Everything was clear and normal. The doctor didn't really give me information about why it took so long for the right tube to finally show up. He said it could have been just the way I was laying, or there may have been like a minimal blockage and the contrast was able to push through that and unblock the tube. There's really no way to know, but what matters is that the end result, both tubes were clear and normal. All in all, the procedure maybe took around 10 minutes. The process of them taking out the catheter and the speculum was not painful for me. After the procedure was done, they just sent me on my way. They gave me a pad, which I had brought one with me. From everything I had read, everyone said, make sure that you have a pad with you to wear after the procedure because there tends to be leakage and sometimes some spotting after the procedure. And I am very grateful that I did, because I was definitely one of the people who had a lot of the contrast come out after the procedure, and I had a little bit of spotting, but it wasn't like full-on bleeding afterwards. As far as pain after the procedure, I didn't really have too much pain. It was just kind of like on and off cramping. pretty similar to what I was feeling during the procedure. There would just be times where all of a sudden I would just feel like really intense cramping, and then it would go away, and then really intense cramping, and then it would go away. But it was not nearly as painful as my periods are, and it was significantly less painful than I was expecting going into it. So I am very grateful for that. The few days after the procedure, I did have some spotting, and a little bit of the contrast kept coming out every so often, but I wasn't in too much discomfort the following days. My advice to you, if you are preparing for this procedure, is, like I said at the beginning of the video, definitely take some sort of pain medication beforehand, because you really don't know how the procedure is going to go for you. It is my understanding, if you do have a blocked tube, that it could be significantly more painful than for those of us whose tubes were clear. So just keep that in mind. It might just be better to take something preemptively and save yourself some pain potentially. Yeah, so if you have any other questions for me regarding the procedure and how it went through me, please leave them in the comments down below. Or if you have some tips or advice for people that I didn't mention, leave those in the comments down below as well. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye. I have a kitty cat here who just keeps bumping into the tripod, wanting to make his own video, apparently. Oh my gosh, Leo. He is driving me crazy right now. He keeps bumping into the tripod. Should I just make the whole video like this? Just like a crazy cat lady? Well, he seems content. Okay. Not sure what's happening now. Ugh, Leo, oh my goodness.